As I'm sure most of you probably already know, riots have been breaking out all over the country in the last few days in response to the death of George Floyd in Minnesota. Now, at the time of recording this video, rioters have destroyed and looted several businesses and stores, set some of them on fire. They've destroyed places like police precincts and fire departments, and people have been shot and stabbed and so on. So it's literally chaos out there right now. Now, I made a video a couple of days ago about how I think that we as Christians should view the injustice of Floyd's death. And since then, I've been getting a lot of people asking for me to discuss the riots and the looting from a Christian perspective. Now, to be straight up, the reason I didn't address the riots from a Christian perspective is because I wouldn't expect for there to be a lot of Christians that are in support of the riots, given all of Jesus's teachings on nonviolence. So I was surprised when I saw a few comments of people justifying the riots by pointing to the passage in the Bible that describes Jesus of getting upset at the money changers in the temple and throwing over the tables. So that leads us to the question, does the Bible provide justification for the riots from a Christian perspective? And how else should Christians think about the riots in general? So in all four Gospels, we have records of people gambling inside of the church, Christ being so upset about it that he goes into the church, throws over the tables, and chases them out of the church. He says, "The scriptures declare, my temple will be called a house of prayer, but you've turned it into a den of thieves." So it's obvious that he was pretty upset. And because of this passage, some people believe that there's a biblical justification in defense of the riots that we see on TV right now. First off, I just want to say that I completely understand the frustration surrounding the death of George Floyd and the frustration with the judicial system. So this video is not going to be trying to invalidate or focus on the emotions behind the riots that people have. Instead, I'm going to be focusing on the actions in response to the emotions, and particularly from a biblical perspective. Now, there's so much that can be said about this situation and all the things surrounding it, but in this video, I'm going to be focusing on what I believe the Christian response should be and discussing the question of if the Bible justifies this sort of behavior that we see in the riots or not. So when it comes to the situation with Jesus in the temple and throwing over the tables, we can start by comparing that situation with the riots and the looting. So first off, when we read the accounts in the Gospels, we don't have any reason to think that Jesus hurt anyone or destroyed any property. And that's in contrast to what we see with the riots, because people have been hurt and plenty of people's property has been destroyed. Secondly, the money exchangers were guilty of violating the purpose of the temple. Now, this is also in contrast to the innocent people's businesses that were destroyed by the rioters. Third, you'll notice that Jesus calls the temple my Father's house because he, being the Son of God, he had authority over the temple. We as Christians know this. The church wasn't made or intended for gambling, and Jesus had a right to it. Fourth, Jesus taught against responding in violence all throughout his ministry. You can think about the time when Peter pulled out a sword to protect Jesus from being arrested, and Jesus told him, no, put the sword down. You also have passages where Jesus says things like, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world. And over in the Bible, Jesus tells people to turn the other cheek, repay curses with blessings, to love your neighbor as you love yourself, and so on. So I know it seems obvious, but burning down your neighbor's business that they've worked hard for and used their entire life savings to get is not loving your neighbor. I know more examples could be given, but I'm sure you get the point. And lastly, for the sake of the argument, let's just go ahead and say that Jesus destroyed the temple and burned it to the ground, just as the rioters have been doing across the country. Even if Jesus was violent in this sense, the disciples and the early Christians didn't interpret his actions as justifying violence. The other writers of the New Testament saw Jesus as being completely nonviolent, and they imitated his teaching in the other letters of the New Testament. We read of them telling us to be like Christ and repay curses with blessings, and to do your best to make peace with all men, to love and respect your enemies, to honor all people, never pay back evil for evil to anyone, and so on. On top of that, the disciples and the early Christians refused to react in violence, even in situations where legitimate self-defense could be used, such as them being taken into custody to be martyred and other situations that were like that. In fact, we don't have record of any Christians committing and responding in violence for the first century or the second century or the third century of Christianity's existence. It wasn't until Rome adopted Christianity that Christians responded in violence in a Roman way, which is another conversation altogether. But the point here is that even if Jesus did think that his followers destroying property was a legit response to some injustice, his followers didn't understand him to be saying that at all. Now, more reasons could be given, such as passages about submitting to government officials in times of persecution, but you get the point. The scriptures clearly forbid the behavior of the protest that we've been seeing all up in the news. If we as Christians decide to go protest, then we should proceed in doing what Martin Luther King described as persistent, peaceful protests. Because civilians exercising violence in this way is not something that I believe that the scriptures teach that we should be part of. So those are just a few of my thoughts on the riots. Go ahead and let me know yours down below. Do you agree with me, or do you think that there's something I'm missing? Let me know. And the next time that you hear people trying to use Jesus turning over the tables in defense of the riots, what are you going to say? What do you mean?